What's the strangest conversation you've accidentally eavesdropped on? Didn't hear the full conversation, but I walked in on two employees at a convenience store with the conversation ending with the phrase, "and that's when we hid the clams." A few kids were debating on what happened to the poop after you flushed it on the train. One believed it exploded on impact with the rails, another debated the possibility of it being shot out of the side like a cannon, and another knew it was used to fuel the train. Was checking into a luxury hotel when I was younger, and the people in the next room were fucking like animals. So I keyed a bit slower than I normally would have because I had never been in this situation and I was intrigued, and then in between grunts and moans she yells, "I bet your wife doesn't fuck you like this." Probably goes on every day, but I never heard something like that before or since. Killing time in Starbucks before my bus comes when two well-dressed businessmen walk in. "Hey, crazy day yesterday, huh? Haha, yeah. I didn't know you could train dogs to do that. It haunts me. I have so many questions that will never be answered." At a Chinese restaurant, an old man says to his friend, "I'm telling you my balls swelled up like this." Then he holds his hands apart like he's holding a grapefruit. Once listened to a story a woman was telling her friend sitting next to me in a cafe. She became suspicious of her husband cheating on her when she was helping him unpack from a business trip and noticed a weird white stain on his shirt. She told the whole story of her googling how to figure out what it was, which I think included using specific light and stuff. Never actually got to hear the ending though, unfortunately. Heard over a cube wall at work, "You promised that we would get a divorce after you got your green card." I once sat on my balcony, 3rd floor, at 2 AM to listen to a guy, ground level, who discovered his girlfriend was cheating on him, 4th floor. He climbed a tree and saw her topless with a guy with her light on. I opened a beer and took a seat. "You said you were studying. You don't study with your shirt off!" Exclamation point. I was once in a Starbucks in Boston and witnessed a breakup which was immediately followed a failed proposal attempt. It was the craziest thing. The dude was very into her and her body language did not reply in a copacetic manner. He confessed his love to her. She replied that it wasn't gonna work and she might need some time. He replied, "We have the rest of our lives to figure it out, so you have time there." He got down on and he pulled out a ring. She stood up and said, "This is what I am talking about." "You don't listen." She asked him to stand up. He said with tears in his eyes, "Why?" "I am still waiting for an answer." She gathered her things, took left out the back. The man sat back down and finished his frappuccino while crying. I refer to the story as the saddest cold coffee beverage ever. I overheard two guys on the subway in Nick discussing what was the perfect handgun caliber to whack someone. There was a small dude who was adamant that the best gun was a 9mm because that's what cops use. Then the big dude starts shaking his head negatively, goes on to give a small speech about anatomy and ballistics, then proceeds to state that a competent assassin would use a mere .22 handgun. Since it's hard to track, ammo is cheap and you can mag dump someone in the head without anyone knowing it's gunfire. I think those guys were on their way to the Hitman convention. Me and some co-workers were eating lunch outside on a patio and all of a sudden two guys walk by and one goes, "I was licking her butthole and forget I was allergic to peanuts so I spent the night in a hospital." We started cracking up and the guy noticed and said, "What?" It happens. In the 90s when people used to use cordless phones, you could pick up phone calls on a scanner. This is how I found out our downstairs neighbor was cooking and selling large quantities of meth out of his apartment. My neighbor's talking to a prostitute about paying the price of 1 hour, but she wanted double the pay cause there were two guys with her. She wanted 1 hour per person, and the guys wanted to pay 1 hour period. I was pulling up to an intersection with a bus stop right as the light turned green. I crept by the stop and all I heard was an old black dude saying, "That's how the motherfucker took my leg." I look out my passenger window to see him with a prosthetic in his hand, sitting in a wheelchair, facing the other people at the bus stop. IDK what story they heard, but it was damned good. Just last week, I was in line for customer service at the grocery store with my girlfriend. Sketchy looking dude comes up to the woman in line behind us, says hi, and she says something to the effect of, "I don't think I should be talking to you right now. I don't even know where my daughter is." They started talking quieter and we couldn't make out all of what they were saying, but we at one point heard her say something along the lines of, "Why can't you just admit that she might be in Iowa?" Double quote. Unfortunately, our turn to get help came up, and we had to abandon the conversation. Wish we would have been able to hear more. I was on the train listening to a woman yell on the phone that she wouldn't be able to make it to her dentist appointment because she had left her teeth at home. My downstairs neighbors were having a fight. I was listening to a woman yelling, "Did you fuck her? Did you fuck her?" over and over. It really got exciting when another woman answered, "No. No, I didn't." A boy was telling his sister if she remembers how their mom used to beat them when they were kids. They were no older than 9. It was obviously weird because that's not the kind of thing you would talk about with a couple dozen people around them. To college age dudes walking by me. And that's why I'm going to hell. No, you're going to hell because of all that dick you suck. That's true, I do suck a lot of dick. Black family in the Christmas decorations aisle. 3-year-old, "Dad, can we get a white man for Christmas?" Shocked dad, "What?" Question mark. 3-year-old, "A white man." Points at shelf. Shocked dad, looks where son is pointing and laughs, "No son, that's called a snowman." Back in grade school, my mom would pick me up from school, then we'd go back to her office and I'd wait there until her last class for the day ends. One time, one of her co-teachers just barged into her office and talked about how tired she was because she had gotten married the weekend before and she and her new husband had been having a lot of sex since. They ended up talking about it as if I wasn't in the room. I was walking out of the post office and I stopped near the exit because I wanted to pack my stuff into my backpack. I stood by the wall and there was a door next to me. As I was packing, I heard a man saying that someone in his family hung themselves on a tree. The body was hanging for weeks and after time, the corpse got separated from the head and fell down. It looked like someone was sitting under the tree, resting in the shadow. The head was still hanging above the rest of the body. That's the only part of the conversation I've heard because I left the building. That was pretty messed up to hear, especially in a public place like that. I was eating at a small cafe, and I overheard the older women next to my table talking about how their young female neighbor got AIDS as a result of the time that she spent with Nigerian painters. Gangster type sitting behind me on the bus, on his phone, rationalizing murdering his ex-girlfriend and anybody who got in the way, to a friend of his trying to talk him out of it. The gangster was telling his friend that this was something that Jesus would do. The next few days I kept an eye on local news and thankfully no reports of anybody being murdered. Dude walking down Collins Ave by South Beach in Miami on his cell phone. Said, "But baby, you know I gots to slap you if you piss me off." She had left him and he was calling her to plead for her to come back to him. He sounded genuinely upset. It wasn't a weird conversation, but an exceptional coincidence. I was halfway around the world in Greece, eavesdropping on 3 girls gossiping about one of my old co-workers over dinner. What are the chances? I was sitting in the food court of a mall, eating and minding my own business. A couple passed by my table and all I heard was her say to him, "Because my head went numb when you were laying on it last night." I will never, ever get any context for what I heard. I heard, "Oh yeah, I had to go get an exorcism this weekend." 2 guys on a plane, flying to a wedding. Sounded like they were in the wedding party. They were going back and forth about how the bride had fucked at least half the groomsmen, and even one of the bridesmaids. It sounded like it happened in the past, rather than an infidelity thing. But maybe those guys were super casual about adultery. They were trying to figure out if the groom knew. They decided he probably didn't know. So then they were arguing the merits of telling him vs keeping their mouths shut. They never came to a conclusion on the plane. She sounds like one interesting woman. I work at Walmart, so I tend to hear a lot of things I really shouldn't. One time I was stocking and I overheard a couple who looked they were straight from the backwoods bickering with each other. He's pleading that he's sorry and that he didn't mean to. Then he says, Baby, I'm sorry, I didn't know she was my cousin, it just slipped in. I didn't know these things happened enough to have an open conversation about it at Walmart. I was eavesdropping on some popular girls in middle school, and the question came up between who they thought they would hook up with and my group of friends. They said my name. Biggest confidence boost I've had to this day. Two French strippers talking about one of them having period blood running down her leg while on stage. It was a dress shop and I was sitting in the husband chair while my wife tried on dresses. They were sharing a room and would come out to the three-way mirror and speak in French while they pose modeled their dresses. When my wife finally came out and it was time to leave, I looked at them both and said au revoir. Walking in gym and heard a kid I previously had a crush on say, bro, you got booty tickled. And then another respond with, but she was my neighbor. In high school, I was in the school cafeteria line and overheard a couple of students talking about war. One guy was confidently explaining how he was sure that Sweden was going to invade Finland soon and that he was planning going back there to defend it with his dad and uncle. Dad was from Land Island and at their family estate they would set up the first line of defense. This was in Sweden in 2007. The invasion never happened. This happened the other day and only just remembered. Was cycling home and overtook some young lads, at a glance I'd say about 13-14 years old, mouthing off to each other. But as I was cycling past I genuinely overheard. Oh, mate. You know what I'm going to get when I'm older and have my own garden? A fucking fuchsia. I just couldn't. I was watching fireworks a few years ago and heard a dude talking about fucking his sister. I was at a rave and we went outside to the smoking area. Past a group of people and one guy was really excitedly saying, "You're gonna die, I'm gonna die, and everyone we know is gonna die." Really wish I'd stopped to hear where that was going. On the bus outside Sunday school with two preteen boys. And then he ate their brains for his dinner. Dude, that's not what happened. It is, he rose from the dead and then he ate them. Yeah, he came back from the dead but that doesn't mean he was a zombie. Then why did they call it the Last Supper? I was on lunch and I was sitting in a small room away from everyone else. I usually have my headphones on but the wire tends to slip out of my phone from time to time. As the cord came out I heard a coworker crying and talking to someone on the phone. She recently discovered she was pregnant and wasn't sure who the father of her baby was. She guessed it was one of our co-workers that she had a on and off relationship with and was going to tell him that he was going to be a father when they were meeting up in a few days. That was about a year ago and to my knowledge he doesn't know that he may not be the father. I overheard my mom gossiping about me and my brothers to my dad. We really tick her off. In the library and a girl on the phone says, "Baby, just come over, I want to make love to you and make spaghetti. I know I can't change the past but I can change your future." Honestly, jizz on my ankles once, shame on you, but blow your load 4 to maybe 7 times on my ankles, shame on me. All my socks are ruined and now I'm forced to wear Crocs to my mother's wedding. She deserves better than for this to happen, again. I was really young and a group of around 20-year-olds were sitting behind us in hockey game. One chick said, and I quote, "My phone just vibrated so hard in my bra I almost shit myself." Not the weirdest, but still makes me laugh to this day. I wish I heard the rest of it, but walking out of a business somewhere I walked past 2 guys talking and I hear one say, "I don't give a fuck if they kill everything in the ocean. I don't eat seafood anyway." I laughed really hard before it clicked just how staggeringly fucking ignorant that is. I had a student job as an interim music director in a Catholic church. While upstairs in the choir loft getting things ready for a rehearsal later that day, I overheard the pastor talking to his parochial vicar, assistant priest, in the area below. The pastor said, "People are complaining that your masses are too long, you need to move it along." The assistant said something like, "I don't know how to say mass any quicker than I do." In a louder voice, the pastor said, "Don't overthink it. Get 'em in, get their money, and get 'em out." And with that, he left the church, with the assistant just standing there by himself. I was at a dumpling restaurant and the two young women a few tables from me were talking about Craigslist hookups, BDSM, enjoy being slaves, stuff like that. How could I not listen in? My favorite was when the one was talking about a guy she saw every week for that domination stuff, but it's not like I want to date him or anything. And they were roommates. And I'm just sitting there like, my god, they were roommates. I was sitting in a Chinese restaurant with my friend next to some construction workers and I said something along the lines of, has Enrique received the shipment? And my friend played along and said yes, but if he finds out we cut it with baby laxatives we're over. We continued the conversation for a few minutes and I could see the construction workers getting a little weirded out. They got their bill and walked out, and on their way out I heard one loudly exclaim to the other, them boys were talking about lacing something with baby laxatives.